In the iron-fisted world of ancient Sparta, a captured noblewoman found no mercy, only a systematic dismantling of her dignity. Beyond the legends of warriors lies a dark, bureaucratic program of state-owned captives. What they truly did to these women was a calculated descent into a living nightmare. Imagine standing barefoot on cold stone. You are no longer a queen, you are inventory. Molina presses her toes against the stone because there is nothing else to grip. Her husband, her child, her name, all turn to ash. Here, in Sparta, cruelty doesn't shout. It reads from a tablet with a flat, official cadence. This scene isn't just a story. The registration of captives as state property is documented in Spartan law. They use the Agoge, a system of total discipline, to break the friction of private doubt. When a woman is reduced to an idle mouth in an official ledger, her humanity is already dead. In this account, he says, spoken with the flat public cadence of an official record, you are no longer private. You are assigned. You stand barefoot on cold stone. The courtyard opens like a throat of shadow and sun. 32 women arranged in a rough semicircle, sandals left against the wall like abandoned promises. The air tastes of ash and washing water. A man in a crimson cloak steps forward. He does not shout. He does not raise a hand. He reads from a tablet as if reading inventory. Everything you were is finished. Molina knows the cadence before he finishes. The words fold into her body the way smoke settles into cloth. She presses her toes against the stone because there is nothing else to grip. Her name is a sound she has not used aloud since the house burned. Molina. In the memory it tastes like rosemary and the mouth of Hippocrates, the laugh he kept in reserve for their child. There was a night with horror and no heroics, only a slow catching of breath and then ash on the sill. Her children's faces are small, bright fragments behind her lids. In the courtyard, the official's hand moves across the wax. Names become marks. Marks become lists. Lists become assignments. If you want more long-form historical reconstructions like this one, subscribe for future episodes. The registration is a ritual. The functionary, Gorgo, has a tablet of beeswax and a reed stylus. Her fingers are blunt from years of handling records. She asks each woman a single question. Who are you? It is the kind of question that is both intimate and administrative. The answers come in a low ripple of sound. Some offer full names. Some offer only what the city will recognize. Father, region, property. Gorgo records, then she classifies. Each classification carries a code. The codes look neutral. Some are 2 letters, others a number and a slash. They are meant to fit on the wax with room to spare. They fit people into a ledger. The tone never wavers. Cruelty arrives as constancy. Between the courtyard and the rooms where assignments are read, Molina keeps a particular stillness. She has learned to count things to remind herself she is still thinking. The number of cracked tiles beneath her feet, the grain in the wooden doors, the small knot of silver thread at the hem of her ruined gown. In one of the memory fragments, her husband once, smoothing the tear with a thumb, there is such tenderness that she feels the present as an absence. The city that now assigns them was once an enemy with a sound and a shape. Now, its violence is a process. In this dramatized reconstruction, the Spartan model of governance appears less as sudden violence and more as an applied logic, collective primacy over individual life. Training that suppresses hesitation, magistrates who treat people as an allocation problem. The Agoge, boys and girls trained to subordinate desire to discipline, does not need rhetorical cruelty. It needs proportion. When a polity teaches its citizens to move as a body, it enables those citizens to perform acts without the friction of private doubt. This is the framework that shapes the men and women who will now decide what to do with the captured. The first allotments are practical. Food, shelter, rooms within households. The language of distribution becomes the language of a different kind of possession. You are assigned domestic service, or textile work, or childcare. These sound like jobs. They are jobs in the same way a ledger is a body. The difference is that no one asked you whether you wanted the job. The forms do not record consent. They record capacity and risk. Between 2 entries on the tablet, the official adds a marginal note. Suitable for internal household. Those words are quiet, but they are the pivot upon which futures tilt. At night, in the small rooms where the captured sleep on straw, the women whisper. Names are attempted like prayers. Molina says Hippocrates once, not like a petition, but like a test, to confirm for herself that the sound still exists. Others remember their fathers' names, the places they left behind, a particular way of braiding hair. The whispers soften into protocol: how to keep a house's hearth from smoking, how to mend a soldier's cloak, what herbs soothe a fever. Practical knowledge becomes currency. Knowledge of domestic efficiencies becomes a kind of defense. The ephors, magistrates who oversee civic order, speak in the language of balance sheets. They gather in a small chamber with slits for light and argue over classification thresholds. "We must be efficient," one says. "Idle mouths are a drain." Another replies with a slower measure. "The city must also secure households." Their words are not cruel on their faces, they are clinical. The cruelty lies in the arithmetic of human lives. A woman reduced to an idle mouth is not discussed as a person, but as a variable that affects grain stores and morale. The system converts people into units of utility. Gorgo is the face of this apparatus in the courtyard. She is not an arch-villain. She has the firmness of one who learned early that softness costs lives in a city of scarcity. Her hands move with the efficiency of someone who has carved order out of chaos. When she clasps the stylus, her jaw tightens. This is the only expression the day permits. She addresses Molina twice, once when recording her name, once when conveying the classification. "House assignment," she says. The syllables land like a verdict. There is no tenderness in the word. It is a designation. Cleomes will be the one who receives Molina into an inner household. She is a full citizen woman. Her household is a small compound of stone and domestic order. Initially, Cleomes behaves as the role requires: measured hospitality that keeps the household's routines running, strictness that protects its status. She keeps a ledger of her own: cloth counts, child rations, the cadence of each servant's tasks. Yet there are moments where Cleomes's lines soften, as if memory were a pressed leaf that, when handled, reveals its scent. She lingers by the hearth and watches the way Molina threads a needle, as if the gesture called a ghost to her attention. The city offers Molina a choice that is in fact a mechanism of control. The ephors present the alternatives briskly, like proposed routes on a campaign map. Option A: accept intense household labor and a contract that ensures minimal food rations and shelter in return for obedience and availability. Option B: reassignment to outlying labor detachments, work that is perilous and less visible to the magistrates, with thinner rations and exposure to operations that bear a higher mortality. Both options are framed clinically. Both have their costs. Both are a kind of erasure. This framing, the illusion of choice, contains the quietest violence. It pretends to respect agency while shaping outcomes that fit the city's needs. The imperative to choose binds the captive to decision-making under duress. The magistrates call it policy. Molina calls it arithmetic, in which her name is a variable. She chooses the household. The decision is not heroic. It is strategic. There is a sequence of small discoveries. A woman who knows the delicate balance of a stew can keep children alive during a shortage. A seamstress who can make a soldier's cloak tighter saves the household from a cold-related failure. A nurse who knows how to soothe a fever becomes indispensable when illness arrives. Molina understands that becoming necessary creates dependence. Dependence creates shelter. She also understands that shelter will demand the surrender of parts of herself that she had not planned to give. There is a montage of days folded into one another. She learns the way Cleomes prefers water poured. She folds linen in patterns that conservative households favor. She treats a child's fever with a decoction of fennel learned from her mother. She anticipates need. She arrives at the hearth with a detail before it is requested. The city loves a good servant because a good servant means fewer interruptions in the household's economy. The household rewards reliability with a kind of protective gaze. This is the soft architecture of dependency. Not everyone chooses or can choose. Some women refuse, preferring to be publicly defiant. The system is indifferent and clever. Those who resist are reassigned to harsher quotas, work with quarry gangs, holes by the shore, tasks that the city can spare with minimal shame. The reassignment is bureaucratic. It is a transfer across a table with a clerical mark and a soldier's nod. The women who leave do so with a mixture of rage and resigned dignity. The city does not consider their internal lives. It considers only output. What is worse than chains, the narrative implies, is the way sturdy institutions make dispossession ordinary. The system's instruments are not always visible weapons. They are wax tablets, marginal notes, assigned roles, and half-phrases like "suitable for internal household." In one quiet scene, an ephor comments that, "the less spectacle there is, the less sympathy." This is said not as a grim observation, but as an administrative axiom. When cruelty does not look like cruelty, it becomes harder to protest. When the violence is a daily routine, the shock is blunted. Molina's interior life becomes a ledger of its own. She counts days, then hands, then the ways Cleomes admires her folding technique. She measures how quickly Cleomes stops asking where her hands were when she enters a room. It is not fondness, not in any romantic sense the city would recognize. It is calculation and cautious curiosity. Cleomes's attention is both a shield and an exposure. To be useful is to be visible in the inner life of a citizen family. Visibility grants protection. Visibility also makes her more vulnerable if Cleomes decides the household cannot afford the social risk. Molina knows this calculus. She walks it like a tightrope. There are moments when the soft architecture of dependence shows its true cost. At night, Molina sits alone with a scrap of writing she had managed to preserve, a folded sliver of wax with a half-scratched name. She traces the letters until the wax warms beneath her thumb and the lines blur. The functionary's marks are more persistent than ink. The city writes with the sternness of one who knows it will outlast memory. A name on a wax tablet is retrievable. A name erased from the map of social life is harder to find. Molina practices saying her name into the dark until it begins to sound like something the walls might remember. Occasionally Cleomes slips. She hums a tune that matches something Molina once heard in a window of an Athenian house. For a second, the world dissolves into a smell and a tune, and a tender recognition. In that slender moment, Cleomes looks at Molina not as an assignment, but as someone whose hands are steady. It is not pity so much as an accidental kinship. Cleomes covers it quickly with an administrative smile and a comment about hearth fuel. The household returns to order. Yet the impression remains. If memory can be nudged in one household, it could be nudged elsewhere. The system's order is robust, but it is not perfect. Outside the household, the city circulates other mechanisms of erasure. Children born to assigned women are not automatically recorded as citizens. Ration lists bind maternal labor to the needs of the state. Medical registers note pregnancies, assign value to maternal function in terms of utility. The administrative language turns private futures into civic supply chains. A child's name will be registered in an account that tracks contribution more than belonging. This is the political efficiency the ephors praise in council. In this dramatized reconstruction, such mechanisms are not specious inventions, but plausible projections of how a wartime polis could treat the conquered. Where evidence is thin, the narrative frames the action as a coherent logic. When a city faces shortages and legitimizes a collective principle that places the political body above private life, administrative structures will follow. They will, by preference, avoid spectacle. They will prefer lists, assignments, and a rhetoric of duty. Some days are routine to the point of erasure. The women line up for cooked barley and a measured cup of wine. They count rations like people at sea, counting provisions. Tasks are allocated by the house steward. Molina becomes the household's seamstress and nurse. Her hands, once used for different work, now move with the precision of someone who understands the social value of competence. She tightens a button, applies a compress, soothes a crying child. Competence is rewarded with a corner of warmth by the hearth. Competence is a survival strategy that requires the surrender of private aims. Other days are small disasters. A soldier returns with a tear in his cloak. The household frets over its reputation. Cleomes tightens her jaw and consults the ledger, not the moral calculus. The repair must be done without fanfare. The city will notice efficiency. It will notice failure. Molina takes up the needle. She works through the night in the shadowed room while others pretend to sleep. When she finishes, the cloak looks as if it had never been injured. Cleomes nods once, as if to say aloud what the ledger discreetly confirms. You are useful. A particular scene returns to Molina as a kind of slow grief. A woman named Thalia, before assignment, a name associated with a small lands in Attica, refuses to be folded into domesticity. She speaks aloud against the city's policies and is reassigned. The reassignment is processed with a stamp and a soldier's escort. Her last look is toward the courtyard, where Molina and others watch with mute understanding. The moment is not heroic in the way stories require. It is a quiet martyrdom that the city can absorb into its daily noise. Thalia's absence becomes another mark on the ledger. The cost of Molina's strategy is not purely private. She becomes, incrementally, a different person. Her gestures, once a language shared with her lost household, now translate into forms that serve a Spartan household. She learns not to complain when a soldier's hand rests on the back of her shoulder. She learns silence. The narrative dwells on the inner arithmetic. what parts of herself she can keep safe, and what she will have to surrender. Each concession is negotiated not with rhetoric, but with utility. A stitch here, a salve there. The system is not cruel because its agents are monsters, but because it has found ways to make moral injury administratively ordinary. Gorgo, for instance, will later bring a child of her own to the register. She has the same hands as the functionary who signed women into households. The role of functionary forms people. The magistrate who signs a transfer might have once been the parent of a child who needed bread. Their choices are shaped inside institutions that reward certain behaviors and punish others. That does not absolve them. It explains how efficient cruelty can be felt as a policy and not as a sin. At the story's climactic moral turn, Cleomes calls Molina aside. It is at dusk, when the thrushes are still singing in a corner of the compound, and the household's lights are snuffed one by one. Cleomes places a small ceramic cup in Molina's hands. "We cannot let the child go without proper care," she says. The phrase is administrative, a recommendation couched in practical need. There is a tenderness under the official language. A child is ill and requires attention. Molina has been tending the children. She has become the one who sees small changes in color and breath. Cleomes's voice, for the first time, disguises something like concern. "Make yourself indispensable," worships the household ledger, the city would say through 1,000 small protocols. Molina understands that becoming indispensable is both armor and chain. She decides deliberately to tighten her skill, to anticipate needs before Cleomes can state them. She plants little favors, a line of clean shirts, early warning of a crew member's gout, the quiet knowledge of what herbs soothe a cough. Dependence grows because it is fed. This strategy yields protection. The household shield is not legal, it is social. A citizen family will not willingly expose itself to scandal for one of its own essential servants. The protection is partial. It is contingent on the household's ongoing calculation that the servant's value outweighs the risk of association. Such calculations shift, and the servant's life tilts with them. Molina knows this. She learns, too, to read the ledger in Cleomes' face. When Cleomes counts and finds the household slightly short, her gaze narrows. When grain stores improve, her face softens. The metrics of survival are number and mood. There is also a small mutiny of memory within the household. Cleomes, in private, keeps a small item hidden, a copy of an old hymn, a folded piece of cloth smelling faintly of time. Sometimes she hums the hymn while polishing a bowl. Molina learns the tune. It is not the city's melody. Hearing it is like discovering a leak in a dam. Those leaks make the machine susceptible to small human intrusions. If one person remembers, another can be reminded. If enough are reminded, a fracture might form, not a revolution, not necessarily, but a gathering of private recollections that erode the sense that the city's decisions are inevitable. The Effers speak again of efficiency in counsel, trying to anticipate these leaks. "Memory is a vector," one says. "We must ensure narratives do not reconstruct resistance." Their response is procedural. Distribute assignments in a way that isolates groups, rotate households, enforce record-keeping that highlights civic loyalty. They frame measures as neutral. The narration keeps the register flat because the danger is most potent when soft words hide hard logic. Towards the end, Molina acts on a decision that is moral and tactical. An illness sweeps part of the household. Staff become weak. The household's ability to present itself intact falters. Without pretense, Molina volunteers to take on a heavier load of care. She does not have illusions of heroism. She knows such a sacrifice makes her more valuable. It also brings her closer to those whose power can protect or discard her. She multiplies the work she does in one day. The household's ledger widens with correct entries. Cleomes acknowledges the work in a way that is not public but sufficient. Molina is granted a patch of material comfort, a small bowl set aside, a blanket with fewer moth holes. These are small mercies. They keep her alive. They do not restore what she lost. The final moral cost is subtle and internal. Molina has been alive by building a web of quiet usefulness. She has not broken the system. She has found a node within it, and tightened herself around that node so it will not let go. The system hums on, as efficient as ever. The Effers continue to meet in small chambers and mark off lists. Gorgo continues to ask names and write classifications. Cleomes continues to balance household ledgers. The city has not been transformed. The household that sheltered Molina remains intact. Molina herself carries a kind of practical victory. It is not the glory of a redeemed past. It is a survival that required the soft erasure of prior claims. Maternal rituals abandoned, public name recited less often, private refusal exchanged for daily bread. The narrative closes on a small domestic image, the wax tablet in Molina's pocket. She had once thought to hide it, then used it as a comfort. The wax bears an attempt at a name scratched at the edge, letters half-formed, as if written with an unsteady hand. The wax is warm from being held. It is porous in memory and insufficient for restitution. Molina presses the letters with her thumb, trying to make the name clearer. The tablet will not restore what was lost. It will, however, be a record of her attempt to keep something of herself alive. If you imagine worst acts as chains and spectacle, the story shows another terror. A city that organizes consent into forms, that treats human beings like allocations, that transforms intimate lives into municipal efficiencies. That is what makes the treatment worse than many imagine. It is quieter, more durable, and therefore more insidious. The harm is not a single event, but a structure, calm, procedural, wrapped in the language of civic necessity. The brutality is measured not in screams, but in recorded silence. The ending does not promise justice. It does not rehearse rebellion. It ends with survival and a cost stitched into a household's routine. Cleums will perhaps remember the tune again. Gorgo will grow older and keep records with steadier hands. The ephors will argue about efficiency until the end of their terms. Molina will wake and fold linen and mend cloaks, and every small act will be both sustenance and surrender. This is a dramatized reconstruction intended to explore how wartime polities can weaponize administration to erase identity. It treats uncertain specifics as part of an interpretive imagining rather than definitive history. For historical sources and scholarship that discuss how ancient states managed captives, consult the materials linked in the description below. Would you survive like Molina, making yourself indispensable to live another day, or refuse and risk a different fate? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this reflection mattered to you, subscribe and share this video with someone who appreciates deep historical reconstructions.